Ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like someone's protesting a little too much, trying way too hard to convince you they're innocent, and it just ends up making you more suspicious. Well, that's what we're diving into today. Those cases where a seemingly airtight alibi, the kind that looks perfect on paper, becomes the very thing that trips someone up.
It's a fascinating paradox when you think about it. We tend to think of a strong alibi as this kind of unbreakable foundation in a case. But as we'll see, these cases really expose how even the most carefully crafted facade can completely crumble when it's put under the microscope.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house on sand. You might not see the cracks at first glance, but dig a little deeper, and the whole thing falls apart. We're going to explore how these seemingly insignificant details, these little inconsistencies, can make or break a case.
It really underscores how an alibi isn't just about being able to account for your whereabouts. It's about the larger context, your behavior, the story you're telling, and whether all those puzzle pieces fit together in a believable way.
All right, it's about the bigger picture. And speaking of, let's jump into our first case with Darlie Routier. This one takes us to Texas, 1996. 2 young sons tragically murdered, and their mother, Darlie, claims an intruder did it. At first glance, her story seemed pretty plausible.
Initially, yeah. She had defensive wounds, described a struggle, and the crime scene seemed, at least on the surface, to support her account. But then there's the 911 call. That became a major focus for investigators.
Yeah, her demeanor on that call just felt off. It didn't seem to match the gravity of what she was describing. And then, of course, you have the silly string incident. Just days after the murders, there's video footage of Routier at a birthday party for one of her deceased sons, spraying silly string and appearing, well, almost joyful.
And that's really where things took a turn in the court of public opinion. Prosecutors really seized on that footage, arguing that her outward display of grief just didn't align with the horrific nature of the crime.
Which, of course, raises the question, is there a right way to grieve? It's such a deeply personal experience, and this case really sparked a lot of debate about how we as a society perceive and judge grief, especially when it doesn't fit our expectations.
Absolutely. While her alibi initially seemed strong, these smaller details, these inconsistencies, chipped away at her credibility. They created this dissonance, and ultimately I think that played a role in her conviction.
Okay, so now let's shift gears to another high-profile case, one you've likely heard of, even if you don't follow true crime that closely. Casey Anthony.
Yes. The disappearance of her daughter, Kaylee, absolutely captivated the nation. Anthony's initial claim was that Kaylee had drowned in the family pool. And I think at first that seemed like a plausible explanation.
Right. Initially, there wasn't any concrete evidence to directly contradict her story. But here's where things get really interesting. It was Anthony's behavior after Kaylee's disappearance that really fueled suspicion. We're talking partying, getting tattoos. Behavior that for a lot of people just didn't reconcile with the image of a grieving mother.
And that's a great example of the power of public perception, isn't it? Regardless of the hard evidence, her actions, or I guess in this case, her inaction, had a huge impact on how people viewed her story.
It really makes you think about how our own biases and expectations about behavior can color our judgment, even in the face of a legal trial, right?
Absolutely. It highlights the immense complexity of the justice system and how public opinion can play such a huge and often unpredictable role.
And in a shocking turn of events, despite the cloud of suspicion hanging over her, Casey Anthony was found not guilty.
The prosecution, while they had a very emotionally charged case, There were some holes in their evidence. And ultimately, the defense was able to raise enough reasonable doubt to sway the jury, which in the American legal system is all it takes.
So does that mean her alibi was good? Or does it just highlight how even a seemingly flawed alibi can still create enough doubt to lead to an acquittal?
That's the question that continues to spark debate, isn't it? The Casey Anthony case really underscores that what constitutes reasonable doubt can be influenced by a whole range of factors. It's a complex legal concept, and it doesn't always align with public sentiment.
Okay, so we've seen how public perception, how someone acts, can really make or break an alibi. But what happens when a seemingly airtight alibi masks something much darker? Well, that's where our next case takes us. The story of Fred Tokars.
Tokars was a successful attorney. His wife was murdered, and his alibi airtight, at least initially. He was out of town on business when the murder took place.
So perfect alibi, right? Case closed. Well, not so fast.
Not quite. See, Tokars was also caught up in some serious financial scandals, and there were whispers, rumors of potential ties to organized crime.
And suddenly that business trip doesn't seem so simple anymore.
Exactly. His attempt to appear squeaky clean, to have this ironclad alibi, backfired. It put a spotlight on those other dealings, those darker parts of his life he was trying to keep hidden.
It's almost like he inadvertently led investigators right to his front door by trying so hard to appear innocent.
And that's a crucial lesson. An alibi doesn't exist in a vacuum. If other aspects of your life are a mess, that seemingly perfect alibi might just crumble under scrutiny.
It's a classic case of the cover-up being worse than the crime. By striving for an alibi that was too perfect, Tokars ended up raising more red flags than he lowered.
Tokars' case really illustrates how obsessing over a perfect alibi, you lose sight of the bigger picture, you know? The truth always finds a way to come out.
It's like no man is an island, right? In this case, no alibi is an island.
Exactly. These cases drive home the point that an alibi isn't just about where you were at a specific time, it's about everything surrounding that. The context, the behavior, the whole story you're trying to sell.
Right, like, are you Fred Tokars, a hotshot lawyer on this super convenient business trip?
Or Darlie Roudier grabbing that silly string days after a horrific tragedy.
Or even Casey Anthony, seemingly ready to party while her child is missing. Those actions, those things that just don't add up, they can unravel even the most solid alibi.
And those cracks in the facade, those little inconsistencies, that's what investigators are trained to see.
It makes you wonder, why even bother with elaborate alibis? Statistically, isn't it more likely you'll get caught lying than actually get away with it?
It's a good question, isn't it? Part of it might be this belief, this often totally wrong belief, that we're way more clever than we actually are.
Like we can orchestrate this perfect crime, outsmart everyone.
Yeah, we overestimate our ability to deceive, to control what people think, and maybe more importantly, we underestimate just how good forensic science has gotten. Eyewitnesses, even our own behavior, it can all betray us.
We're also driven by this primal need to avoid consequences, right?
Absolutely. The fear of getting caught, of facing what we've done, it's so strong that we'll cling to any story, any alibi that might offer an escape, even if it's only going to make things worse in the end.
A defense mechanism, a way to shield ourselves from our choices.
Exactly. And it speaks to how complicated we are, our rational side battling our emotions, especially when the pressure's on.
So when it comes to alibis, it's not just where you were, it's how you act, how you present yourself, right?
Because even the smallest thing that seems off can make investigators doubt everything.
The devil's in the details.
And in these cases, those tiny slip-ups, those things that didn't quite line up, that's what blew the whole thing wide open.
So are there any foolproof alibis then? In this day and age, can you even create one that'll hold up under scrutiny?
That is the million-dollar question. And, well, it's not a simple yes or no.
Oh, come on, don't leave us hanging.
To have a truly perfect alibi, it has to be airtight on every level. Verifiable, backed up by solid witnesses, or undeniable evidence. It's got to fit with how you normally act, your routine.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, it has to be believable. Not just to a jury, but to everyone.
So basically, unless you've got a time machine stashed away or a secret twin you can frame.
A truly flawless alibi. In most cases. Yeah, it's not going to happen. There are just too many variables, too many ways for those inconsistencies to pop up, for the truth to come out.
Because the truth always comes out.
It really does. And that's what's so fascinating about these cases. No matter how smart or cunning we think we are.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
Exactly. We try to outsmart the system, but often it's our own actions that need to control the story that trip us up in the end.
So if pulling off the perfect alibi is basically impossible, does that mean we're all just one slip up away from having our little lies fall apart? It seems like with all the tech we have these days, it's got to be easier than ever to get caught.
That's an important point. We have to think about alibis differently in the digital age. It's not that they're useless, but we leave these digital trails everywhere we go.
Right. It's like that saying, the best lie is the truth, poorly remembered. But now, our phones, computers, they remember everything perfectly.
Exactly. Every click search, location tag dot, it's all there. So yeah, if you think you can outsmart technology with a made-up alibi, think again. Those digital footprints tell a story.
Okay, so where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for everyone listening who's now probably second-guessing every story they've ever told?
I think it boils down to this: authenticity, honesty, being accountable. Instead of pouring all your energy into some elaborate lie, maybe a better and frankly more freeing approach is just being upfront, even when it's tough.
Because the truth comes out eventually, right?
Yeah.
And when it does, it's the lengths we went to hide it that usually cause the most damage.
No question. These cases, they're cautionary tales. We can try to game the system, but it's usually our own choices, that desperation to control the narrative, that trips us up.
Reminds me of that Orwell quote, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." Maybe just being honest, even when it's scary, is the strongest defense we have.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What other cases come to mind where a seemingly solid alibi just completely unraveled? What do these stories say about us, about our need to control how we're seen, and that often bumpy road to finding the truth? Until next time, keep those questions coming and, as always, delve deep.